Welcome to Software Testing Unleashed, the podcast for software developers, software testers, and all people in the software engineering area who wants to create amazing and good quality software. My name is Richie. I'm a software quality coach, keynote speaker, author, and podcaster. And my guest today is Jani Grönman. I met him first at the Istanbul Software Testing Conference, and he gave one speech I clearly remember after all these months now. He is managing partner at Hidden Trail, and his mission is turning quality from the cost into competitive advantage. He works with teams, management, product people, developers, and testers to recognize where their product quality comes from and how to make it an asset. Jani has over 20 years experience in the software industry and believes that quality means business. We talk today about KPIs, about key performance indicators, and therefore a specialty for quality metrics. How to balance the metrics, how to choose between quality and quantity metrics, and the overall goal with the question, what do we want to achieve with these KPIs? And now enjoy the episode. Hi Jani, great to have you on the show here.
Hello, it's nice to be here. Great to see you again.
Yeah, great that you joined us here. We met in Istanbul at the Istanbul Software Testing Conference, and I saw your talk, and also I think Gilad mentioned you for the episode 2, and then you were already on my backlog, and so I think okay, now it's the time to make this episode together, and. It was a very interesting topic too, so maybe we can do a further episode 2 about this topic, what you did with AI. But today we have a more foundational topic for testing, a really good thing, I think, for projects and for doing software development. It's about KPIs and quality metrics.
Yes.
And as I remember, it's a huge topic. Can so much measure and do not and do the wrong things. So I think it's very important to talk about these topics. But to go into it, just bring us into the topic. What are KPIs for, and what can we do with them? And then we will see.
Yeah, it's like. Well, KPI stands for key performance indicator, and it's like a business term for a metric that is used to measure some development in some area, for example, improving some processes and stuff like that. But why it's important for us in quality business is that often we are trying to make a change in our work, in our environment, with our clients, etc. I'm a consultant, so I talk about my clients a lot, and that's my kind of context. So it's very often the case that we want to change something. There's some kind of transformation ongoing, and teams want to improve their ways of working. Teams want to improve their lead times and their quality and testing outcomes. So if you cannot measure what you change, it's really hard to lead the change, and it's really hard to understand are you doing something right, or should you try something else. So that's why we need to have some metrics, and that's an interesting topic, because many of us have kind of KPIs in use in our daily lives, but those are maybe not so well placed metrics all the time. So that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, because there is such a huge overload of possible metrics we have all over the literature and in the community. And so I did a book with Harry Sneed and Manfred Baumgartner. It's in German. It's Software Metriken, and it is a very fat book. A lot of metrics in there, but for most people, it's hard to decide which metrics are really useful for, especially when we go to software quality. So when you look at your experience in the project, what are typical metrics? What really brings us forward and really gives us information that we can use for our transformation and for reaching our quality goals?
Well, if I start from the typical ones, I think in testing we have amount of tests and also like for example unit test coverage percentage and like those are kind of good metrics. But we humans, if I have a KPI that my performance is measured by the amount of tests I write for in a certain time period, it's very likely that I start to play that KPI so that I can get most out of the bonuses I'm promised and stuff like that. So setting those KPIs is a they need a counter metric. So there should be optimally a pair of metrics. So something that you can show side by side on your dashboards. For example, like mean time to resolve a bug, for example, or some kind of issue in production can be a good KPI. But that should be balanced by something like, for example, reopen rate. So we can be sure that we don't just like close the production issue tickets and that's it. But we also measure that those issues are not coming back. So those kind of pairs of metrics are important.
I think this is very important. Often when I come to a client and talk with the team, and they have always this in their definition of done that they reach about the unit test coverage about 80, 90, 100% or something like that. But they don't look on the quality of these tests they write. So it's just the amount. And as you said, if I have to reach a certain level of amount, I'm writing test cases and test cases and test cases until I reach this threshold. So what would be, I think this is a typical part with the unit test because it's so easy to measure. What is there for a counterpart to get more quality into unit test cases, for example?
Well, we usually measure like test pass rates, right? So how green we are. That should be balanced, for example, with how much we are missing, even though we are green. So a counter metric of could be for test pass rates, for example, could be like escaped defect rates or flaky test rates, stuff like that. So we could like have more control of that metric. So
okay, and for the when we look for the classical testing job, so writing test cases and finding issues, do you have more examples? What good metrics are we can use in our projects?
Where I come from is I come from thinking about quality engineering, so shifting left and having continuous feedback loops and good reliability metrics, for example. And also on the other side, I like to promote product-minded development thinking. So instead of measuring like testers with different metrics than developers, for example, in personal level, is not a good thing. So there should be this thinking that one team, one number type of thing. So from quality engineering this balanced metrics like the team can own, for example, that mean time to recovery or is good one and but then again that what could it be like in practice that one team one number. For example, if I remember correctly, Spotify has this time spent listening metric that they share with their teams, and Airbnb have this nights booked or something, some kind of metrics, and so I would take it up a notch, like in from purely technical level. Of course, those like DORA metrics are important in technical sense, but to really like focus the team in some in the same direction, you should have those kind of a bit more business-like metrics to share with the team. And one part of the product-minded thinking is that you should involve your team also in kind of discussion with the end users, discussion with business people, so they understand like a bit like where the revenue comes and how they can influence that and let that influence in their work. So quite a convoluted answer there, but
So you mentioned to take to more got on a higher level of the metrics and to view also on what I hear out there is also to look on the successes of the product on the market. So to gain more listener time or more bookings or something like that. So to feel that my work in the team has also an impact and it's I can put something into it to increase these numbers.
Yeah, you need to have like agency in your work. So when you're a developer or a tester in a team, so you need to have that feeling that your work matters and it's like useful what you do, and so you are not just producing tests or executing tests, but you are like contributing to the end quality of the product and good like customer experience and those kind of things.
It was interesting. I did in the German podcast an episode about metrics about I think 2 years ago now, and there was one guy saying that it just needs two metrics. It's how fast can I ship to production, and how happy is the customer. So, so it's very very high abstract, and it's but when we see on this level. Is there any value for the metrics we do in the project? How can they help us? When I think of defect rates and something like that, or coverages.
Yeah, of course we can go too much into the technical level in metrics and like because we can measure anything we like from all kind of data sources. So it's also important to keep that kind of simple. So for example, don't set more than 3 or 4 like KPI metrics per team. So it's like focused on some direction. But lead time to production, as you mentioned, it's a good like overall metric because and if you have some kind of benchmark, for example, that what the typical lead times are, the kind of team that you are working with, then you can ask the question: are we reaching that goal? If not, why not? And then like try to figure that out with the team that what needs to be done that we could reach that lead time goal, for example.
And how can we discuss and decide which metrics are good for the project to view, because there are different goals. I think there's one thing to be in the team for to get better and to know where we are with the metrics, but the other side is to report to some stakeholders or managers and so on, and they want to know just if the quality is good. So how can we build this set of metrics in our teams?
Well, the problem is that for example, product management is usually overworked too, and that they don't have much time to discuss these kind of things too much. But you should find a way that you can have their ear and then start to. I would start by asking that what's important for like the classical 3-way thinking, that what's important for you personally, what's important for our clients, and what's important for the company producing this stuff. So and from there, asking more questions about how we reach, are we reaching our goals, and are we there where we should be, and like are we just producing features for features sake? So why getting to the why of things? So that's where I would start, but it can be like a long discussion if different sides of the discussion are entrenched in their positions.
Mm. And I think it's often also a problem to know what's meant with a metric, because metrics can be interpreted on different ways sometimes. So you have to clarify what is really inside this metric and what can we learn from it. I think this is also a discussion for every metric you have to do.
Yeah. It should be understandable and be simple enough, balanced, and it should be owned by someone, and should be reviewed periodically. Like we measure something and never act on it, it's useless metric. So it should be like, I think the ownership of the metrics is also very important, because if you don't act on your measurements, your metrics, then no progress is being made. For example, that the test pass rate, if you just ignore the analysis of what that means, and just go on disabling tests and making your metrics look better, doesn't really increase the quality, does it?
Yeah, that's true. And there are some metrics I remember from what I learned when I was a junior tester, and I wonder if they are still correct. So one was, if we test and test and test, we find in the beginning a lot of defects, and then this curve gets more flat, and the new defects are this. Is this a valid metric in now when we think of agile and all the complexity of software developments? Do you there have any opinion if this is still a usable metric, or is it one from the 90s?
Yeah, I remember seeing that kind of curves myself too, and to a certain degree, yes, it's like when you have a mass of tests, and those will, if product is would be like there would be no changes in the product, those would find the bugs that they find, and that's it. And there's a certain level that of defects that those tests can find, and I think that's the understanding you need to have that you can develop the set of tests to a certain point, and that's where actually the counted metrics come into play. So you need to also measure that how many defects are escaping to the production. So that kind of gives you an idea that how good your test set is, even if it's passing. Are we not testing something that leaks defects into production? So what I didn't know as a junior engineer was that you could have these kind of guardrails or countermetrics that could help.
Yeah.
And I was always looking up at the amount or coverage percentage, and can have like 90% unit test coverage, and then still have defects in production. So how can that be? We are perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, we live in a very complex software development world, so there are so many impacts on everything. So I think we have to really be clear what we can measure there and how can we use these measures too. And when one thing I think of is also when I see my clients and they are counting their issues they have in production, what typically misses is that they analyze these issues if this is really a software bug. So sometimes there can be so many causes of a defect in production, and if we see from the development perspective, for us, typically only counts the ones which lead to missing test cases, the bugs in the software, maybe requirement issues or something like that. So a good analysis of the production issues is very important to get in the information back and to get better in the development and testing team.
Yeah, it's true, and that kind of art of doing good root cause analysis is a really good asset in your team and in your own like toolbox. So and you mentioned the requirements causing defects, and that's also something that's sometimes in at least in testing community, that's all the testers like acknowledge that the like faulty requirements can lead to defects and can lead to like suboptimal test design because you don't know how to test something if you don't have good requirements or understanding of what should be done. And but what's kind of lacking a bit, I think, is that we should, in as testers, we should like reach out more to the requirements engineering side of things, and also get an understanding how to test requirements, how to test these kind of business ideas, and like how to challenge the product management, and how to reach out to them. So we are too much still like tucked away in the like right part of the software development life cycle, and that's sad in that sense, that we would have a lot to give also to the product management.
Yeah, I think that's a very important thing to look at the requirements there, and to get better on this side too, and to understand what's in there. In the beginning, you said that you use KPIs and measures for transforming teams to make them better. And we talked about the KPIs, which are more high level, to more the successes outside, more the which defects are going there. And they are, when I'm in a team, there is a huge gap between me and this metric I use. How do you break this information down that you can put in a change into a team to transform, to get better on this? Because this is so abstract to be on this high level, and to my daily work, writing test cases, doing test automation and so stuff. How do you break this down?
Some team members or engineers, they kind of like to be distanced from the business goals. They only care about the algorithms and coding and the technical side of doing things, and that's fine. But then there are people that are interested in why we are doing this, why we are building these things. So maybe start with those people that are like naturally interested in that, why we are building this product, and they most probably will understand the KPIs better. And also important things is, when you're building the KPIs, you need to bring the team into discussion, and not just like dictate them from above to the team and say that, okay, we are now measuring your this and that, and like be prepared
Yeah.
for the consequences. So it's you need to build them from ground up, so that you can, ideally, I would like bring a product person into discussion, and describe like the what's the world outside looking like, and then have some technical data about performance, for example, like what are our lead times, what amount of rework is always a good like starting point. So how many percentage of your time are you spending in reworking something, fixing bugs, or figuring out why something doesn't work, and then maybe ask the question, would you like to do something else than fixing bugs, for example? So if you would like, instead of 50% of your time going to fixing bugs, what it would, if would be like 10%. Sounds good, right? So then there I would like to start building that understanding, that why we need to like build these metrics, and use some time to build those metrics, and to be able to see where we are going.
I think that's very important, because this involvement of the team also leads to a more relationship to the metrics and so on. So, and if I'm part of the creation of a metric, I have a little more touchy feeling to this metric, and I want to see it going better, and I will do my stuff in my context to get it better. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. And that comes down to the ownership. Like if you can build a spirit in the team that they kind of care about their metrics, and care about those and understand what they are about. So they're not just numbers, but they measure some like real life thing, for example, that the customers are caring about. So that's like win-win situation.
I see. Yeah. Yes, Jani, thank you very much for all these insights into metrics. I think it's a topic which can be discussed on all levels, on all depths, and a long time. But I think it's a good overview how to see on metrics and how to decide which one and get it work for transformation and for reaching the quality goals. So thank you very much that you were part of the show. I hope we can do another episode in the future too. And I wish you all the best and thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Richie, for having me. And it's a huge topic, but it's nice to talk about these things, and let's see what we can do in the future.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.